Hello, hello, hello. Shalomi, my homies. How is everything? It has been a long holiday season. Long time no see, but I'm glad you're here. Glad to be back. Glad to see you guys again. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about spiritual warfare and what it really means, what's actually going on. What's the definition? Is it really the whole angels and demons epic battle happening on the other dimensional plane that we can't see? Is that really what's going on? Like what did that word mean back then? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So stick around. I think we're going to have a good talk, a good discussion ahead because we've got a lot to say. And of course, as always, I am joined tonight by my one and only compatriot, Mr. Bradley. How are you tonight, sir?
I am doing spectacular. I've been super stoked for, both this week's and next week's. Spooky season is my season, and so these topics are my topics. Man, I'm glad to be here. First and foremost, though, we are forgetting. We do have to give our shout out to our loyal patrons.
Where's I don't have that one ready.
Oh,
but yes,
falling down on the job.
No. I can only have one ready at a time. Because right now I have.
Oh, I see.
The book giveaway.
Well, we have the book giveaway. Let's go ahead and mention that one, right?
Yes.
That drawing will be happening next week, right? We're going to figure out who won the book of the month. And as always, I have to mention the irony of giving away a book that undoes the 5 pillars of the Reformation in the month where Reformation Day will be celebrated.
Yes, which is just perfect.
It's beautiful. It's awesome.
It's almost too perfect.
Now that that's out of the way with, my friend, who do you have with you in spirit?
So I am gonna have Bushmills tonight. I am running very low on the alcohol supply because of the holiday season, particularly for Simchat Torah. I was very much running a little lower after Simchat Torah. But so I'm just going to have a Bushmills tonight. It's what I have left. I got a couple other things left, but definitely some of this. How about you? What are you having tonight?
I am, I'm keeping the Sukkot energy going. So this is one that you shared with me while you were visiting for Sukkot. This is Jesse James American Outlaw Bourbon Whiskey. And interesting. So for my Angels Envy fans, we noticed this while sampling it because we actually had a bottle of Angels Envy right next to it. And Seamus, myself, and my father all noticed that this is actually spectacular for the price. Like, this is a cheap bottle of bourbon, and it basically just tastes like slightly watered down Angel's Envy.
Yeah, it's a little lighter, but it's got the same profile.
A little lighter, doesn't have quite as much of a bite, but the flavor profile is nearly identical. It's just as sweet. It's smooth. It's I gotta say, I give it a 9 out of 10 on the scale. Like, it is for the price. It's awesome.
For the price considered, 9 out of 10 for sure. Like, bang for your buck. It was good. I enjoyed it.
But in any case,
now I have this ready.
There we go, our patron supporters. Yeah. Love each and every one of you. You guys are what make this happen, and a lot of these ideas that we discussed came directly from you. So you're helping us to help others. You're helping us to produce content, and we love everybody for it. So to segue into our topic, spiritual warfare. You mentioned angels and demons earlier. And
I did.
That's one of the very typical definitions, right? And it's really cool to think about. It's a neat idea, and I think that's why people tend to focus in that area, is because the human tendency towards the fantastical, and just the idea of fantasy in general. It's why Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Narnia, they have such a big following, because fantasy is naturally interesting. I'm reminded of Frank Peretti's book, This Present Darkness. That's one particular
Mm.
book that outlines spiritual warfare between angels and demons. But that would be an extreme example. I think my very favorite extreme example would actually be from the third Conjuring movie. So, the very opening of the third Conjuring movie, for those of you who have never seen it, spoiler alert. The movie opens with an exorcism. Now, the Conjuring movies are following the exploits of Ed and Lorraine Warren. They were real, actual, legitimate paranormal investigators, and their work is legit. They actually these movies are real stories about things that happened to them. And this one in particular is about a particular case they worked on that was the first one ever. It's the first case ever in America where demonic possession was the plea for a murder charge, right? So somebody was accused of murder, charged with murder, and his plea of innocence was insanity by demonic possession. And he got off with minimal prison time on it because the Warrens were able to prove to an American court of law that he actually was under some alternative influence. So interesting, fascinating story. But the opening of the movie begins with an exorcism that is being performed. The Warrens are there. It's a young boy who is possessed, and the exorcism ultimately fails because in the interim of this exorcism happening, you see flash scenes of what is very clearly a witch doing some black magic ritual that is intended to combat the exorcism. It's a very cool idea of two individuals actually going at it, not physically, but spiritually against one another. So you get that whole fight of good and evil. But again, what we really want to hammer here is these are extreme examples, right? These are not things that we're going to face on a daily basis. And the war that we are in is one that we have to fight on a daily basis. And I think I think I can speak for both of us when our view would be that maybe too much energy is focused in this direction. Would I be correct in saying that, Seamus?
I would say that not that's a good extreme example for sure. But I feel like, and we're going to get into this, when Christians speak of spiritual warfare, they are essentially thinking of exactly that. Like it's a sort of dualist, equal but opposite and opposing forces constantly clawing at you for your attention, right? Like I said in the opener, just kind of, and it's in the video description too, like this sort of cosmic battle that's happening. You can't see it, it's in the other dimension. But both forces are kind of grasping for you to go one way or the other, and it's kind of that and that's like this sort of step below the fighting exorcism kind of thing, but this is the same general idea. And that's I think that's the general thought when people think spiritual warfare. They tend to think of like angels versus demons.
Yeah, that tends to be the idea. And I think another example that comes to mind, though, is the idea that anything bad that happens to you is a spiritual attack of some sort. Happens and you lose your job right when bills are due or something like that, and this is just a spiritual oppression. I'm being attacked, and it's like, sometimes bad things just happen, right? It's we don't live in a perfect world, so just because your life isn't perfect doesn't mean you're under attack. It's not a perfect world. Your life is not going to be perfect. It doesn't mean you're under attack. And I definitely know people personally who that's kind of always the idea. Anytime a minor inconvenience enters the scene, it's this spiritual oppression. It's, pray for me because I'm under spiritual attack. And I think that's probably missing the mark in a big way too.
We've all, I'm sure, heard the sermon before. pastor gets up on stage and he's like, the devil didn't want me to come to church today because I tell you what. Right? And then he gives like this whole string of events that was like stuck in traffic, an accident, this, a stoplight, bad that, a cop pulled over with this or whatever. And it's like that, nothing's stopping me from coming here. We're in a spiritual warfare and the devil was really trying his best. Like, and that's kind of the idea. That's very sensationalist, by the way.
my favorite example of that is, and I know it's common in Baptist churches, but I'm not sure about others. Other people watching, you can comment and tell me whether what denomination you are and how often you've had this experience. But like the guy who typically sits at the front of the church and greets people as they come in, he'll be the one to show up and say, the devil really didn't want me to come to church. I came down with the flu, but I showed up anyway. I got out of that bed and I showed up to church. And it's like, guy, you have the flu and you are talking to people and shaking hands. Go home.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're here to tell you that is not the spiritual warfare that's happening. I've actually put it this way. It sounds really harsh, but the devil is not that interested in you.
You as an individual are not that important to him.
Yeah, you're not Jesus. You know what I mean? Like, he's not omnipotent. He can't be everywhere at once. Sort of talked about this in our Angels and Demons episode in the past. And that's not even really his job. Like, he's not trying to prevent you from doing things in that way. That's not sort of how he operates. But even to that extent, like it's a sort of weird sense of it's sensationalist, but it's also like this really kind of weird sense of self-importance.
Well, the interesting thing about it, especially that, right? Whenever it comes to that kind of oppression, I woke up sick, the devil doesn't want me to go to church, or whatever the tragedy happens to be, usually it's of a physical nature. But what does Paul tell us? He says the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. they're not physical.
I mean that's and that's like this whole dualist like spiritual forces are at war in the physical realm in some way. And not for nothing, there is some truth to that kind of mentality, but for the everyday, regular kind of stuff, that is typically not what's going on. So I guess now is a good time to actually get into like, what is spiritual warfare like actually?
Well, it's funny because I brought this up in the Waypoint podcast, which aired for the first time this week.
Great job on that, by the way.
And I in speaking about one of the definitions of Ammon and how it applies to the Torah, we came to the idea of wearing the commandments, right? And I mentioned how this directly pertains to the idea of the armor of God, which that certainly would apply to spiritual warfare, right? Having this armor of God. So if you look at each aspect of the armor of God, and I plan to do a whole lesson on this at some point, so I'm not going to exhaust it, but each aspect of it does pertain to the Torah in some way or fashion. The description of them in terms of physical and physically applicable items speaks to the idea of carrying out the commandments, right? So that would be to engage in spiritual warfare, right? Is to practice, to walk right in the way. So, I mean, let's think about that though, because that's still physical, right? Isn't it? That's the idea. If your physical observance, that's still something physical. And Paul says the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. And this is where I would say, well, Paul also says that the law is spiritual.
Yeah, Romans 7:14.
Yeah, it's physical things that you do that have an inherent spiritual implication, right? They echo in the spiritual realm when you do them here physically. And that is really, that's as simple as it is. I mean, you can also come to prayer and fasting. I
Which is a
know
physical act of a spiritual thing.
it exactly. And I know in particular the custom of Tikkun Chatzot, which our good friend Gabriel Jewelbilly, he has mentioned this before. This is one of the practices. I think it's more common in Hasidic communities, where they will wake up after midnight and go to the
Yep.
shul and pray. Now, part of it is to bemoan the destruction of the temple, but it does have implications of keeping the dark forces at bay, right? In the middle of the night, which is that's their hour, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like Hasidim really like to utilize Kabbalistic concepts
Yes.
like it makes sense to them, and so waking up at midnight to say a prayer in the middle of the night to bemourn, the temple and to try and keep like bad evil spiritual energies away is kind of a thing where they've come to a conclusion from much more esoteric means, and so they've developed a method to combat that. Christians do the same thing. Everyone really does that. You learn like a spiritual truth, and so you come up with some sort of method to combat that. Yeah, it's much more of a Hasidic thing. Some Jews will do it like on a more individual basis. It's one of the prayers that do not require a minyan, so you don't have to be in an assembly synagogue to do it. So you can do it in the comfort of your own home. But yeah, you're talking about like the armor of God. Excuse me, my still residual throat effects from the sinus infection. The armor of God, like the way it's worded and set up. Again, we're not here to get into it super deeply, but it's very comparative to the presentation that is presented with the high priest garments, right? And the way he clothes himself. And actually, even the Talmud goes so far as to call the priestly garments armor. Like he armors himself in a bunch of gold, basically, and chechelet and all sorts of other things. Is a type of armor. And the reason it's described that way is because the high priest needs to wear these things in order to basically survive in the Holy of Holies kind of thing.
It's interesting this gets brought up, right? Because even the passage in Deuteronomy where it says that men are not to wear women's clothing, right? And that's the word that it uses is women's garments. But then when it turns around and it says that women are not to wear that which pertains to a man, right? It's not the same word for garment. The word there actually is typically associated with armor. It's the same word, and it's understood that is referring to the talit. So again, even this idea of priestly garments, the talit is the priestly garment given to the rest of the population of Israel. The high priest has his garments, and the priestly garment, you can say, that's given to the rest of Israel is the talit. And when it comes in terms of spiritual warfare, again, and some of the more Hasidic ideas, there is a movie that I know you're familiar with called The Possession, because Matisyahu stars in it.
Great movie.
And that the idea of the talit as armor really comes out in one particular scene in that movie, and it's beautiful and I love it. But again, that's an extreme example.
Yeah. But when we talk about, while we're kind of on the subject of Hasidism, actually, we can kind of move into let's stick with this sort of armor, because this is very, like, everywhere you see this spiritual battle going on, be it Ephesians, I think Ephesians 6, Romans 7, it's very military style language. And actually, Tim Hegg notes this in his commentary on the Romans chapter 7. He actually notes that the Greek being used here is military language, like very consistent with other military documents that are written in the same language, much in the same way that, like, you would, like, if you read a correspondence between me and somebody, like another officer, you would be able to easily tell, like, oh, this is very military style speech. Like this is just how military people talk for some reason. You know, stuff like that, where like there's these key phrases that are very particular in the formulation. Now, Romans 7 is set up a lot like this. So this military language is not inconsequential. There's a reason why the armor thing is kind of brought back into it. But that does kind of lead into what exactly you're donning armor against and for. Like what exactly is the purpose of the metaphor? Why the military style language? What is really going on? Again, is it actually this angel and demon stuff, or is it something else? And I think our viewers know by now it's something else.
Yeah. Definitely something else. And I know a lot of our followers and listeners have themselves read through Tanya, so they're probably well aware of where we're going at this point. At least those few. But the battle is one with the self, and we see this brought out throughout the Torah in numerous examples. And I'm gonna try and say this as briefly as I can. I plan to have a much more in-depth explanation and lesson on this, but you know, in Genesis 6, Hashem says, "My spirit will not dwell in / strive with man forever." Matter of fact, I have an article on this that's on the website. And so there's an idea that the Spirit of God dwells in man, yet also struggles with man, or strives with man, wrestles with man, if you will. But that it wouldn't be that way forever. And then it's not. And then later in the example of Jacob wrestles with a man, and then Hashem gives him a new name, names him Israel. And he says, you know, your name is Israel because you have wrestled with God and man and prevailed. It's this idea, right? And the common interpretation would be that, you know, Jacob wrestled with an angel who was called a man, as oftentimes in the Torah, you will find that there is a reference to a very generic a man, and rabbinically it's understood that those examples typically are angels. But there is an alternative interpretation, and this is one that I know that that my father is very fond of, and that's that the man that he wrestled with that night was his own nature, right? It was himself. That's the man that he wrestled with. He wrestled with Jacob, and that has its own implications on why he had to be renamed, right? Because Jacob was overcome, and so now he was Israel. That's the spiritual warfare that we're in daily. It's a daily struggle. It's a daily walk that we do. It's daily battle that we're doing. So what does that look like, though? How do you do that? How do you do battle with yourself on a daily basis?
So for those of you who are not fully tracking, what we're talking about are the two inclinations, right? This is very common within Jewish philosophy, Orthodoxy, Hasidic, or otherwise. You have the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer HaTov. Yetzer Hara is often translated as the evil inclination. Does not always necessarily mean evil, and it's not necessarily an evil thing, but that's just what it's called. And then the Yetzer HaTov, the good inclination. And like just as an example, it's your Yetzer Hara, your evil inclination that gives you the feeling of hunger, right? So it's not always evil. It's not evil per se, but it's just like your animalistic instinct, so to speak.
It's the carnal desires, right? The bodily desires.
It's exactly. And so if you go back and reread Romans 7 with these two inclinations in mind, you're going to find that Paul is talking about this exact war that is within him. You know, there's these two things. There's the part of me that agrees with God's holy law, his Torah, and then there's the things that I end up actually doing. And he kind of has this wrestles like, and by the nature of the fact that I do the things I don't want to do because I want to do the Torah, but then I end up sinning, which means I'm not doing it, which means I'm warring within myself. And it's kind of the back and forth. Romans 7 is that's the paradigm he's coming from, is these two inclinations at war within yourself. they are referred to as spirits, even though he often calls the Yetzer Hara like his flesh and blood. In Hebrew, that's still soul, actually. Nefesh. It's your nefesh. It refers to your flesh and blood, but it's the word basically for soul. And then neshama is another word for soul, but it's like your godly soul with these two inclinations. And so in Greek, it doesn't translate a whole lot well. It sort of seems like it's spirit versus flesh, but it's you versus yourself on a spiritual plane, which manifests itself in the physical plane by your thoughts and your speech and your deeds. The three garments of the soul. If anyone's read Tanya, you know what I mean. The thoughts, speech, and deeds are the three garments of the soul. So
it's through thought, speech, and deed that the inner will is made manifest.
Correct. Because I like we say this example all the time. I can know that I love my wife, but the only way I can manifest that love for my wife is through either thought, speech, and deed. Primarily speech and deed. Thought is like like you're still doing something when you think, and that's more of a personal thing. But in order to make any of that manifest, the three have to occur. You could even say you have to think
itself is made manifest by the speech and the deed.
Correct.
It's implicit in the speech and deed.
So the Tanya does a really good job at really breaking it down. It takes several chapters to do so. So we're trying to squeeze a lot of information kind of in a little bit here, but the idea of wearing the garments of the soul as sort of an armor or a protection is a very Jewish concept. Paul was not coming up with anything new when he was making these comparisons. When he brings up the armor of God, he's using this language specifically because it is a very fundamental thought in Jewish philosophy. And so, so I would, in fact, I'm not going to like waste everyone's time. I would reread Romans chapter 7 with this in mind, particularly the last paragraph, the very last paragraph of Romans chapter 7. It's like 21 through 25, verse 21 through 25, I believe, is really going to hit the nail in the head with what we're talking about here, where he kind of concludes everything he's saying with the two things that are at war within him. And so eventually we get to, okay, so what exactly is, I guess, the solution to this type of spiritual, warfare? And that's why the military language is actually very apropos. We're going to kind of go back to that a little bit.
Yep.
Because you and I have talked about this before. What does a military lifestyle look like? Now,
discipline.
I've been in the military, of course, but I actually want to hear what you think, because you grew up with a military father.
Yeah.
And so even from the civilian side, which technically you're a civilian, I hate to break it to you, but technically you're a civilian. But even from your side, I want to hear like what you would have to say, having not actually engaged in militaristic style, like, actually being in the organization. Because the point I'm basically going to try and prove is that you can be a civilian and totally understand what's going on here. So,
right. Yeah, no, the granted, you've mentioned one reason that, and you can be a civilian and completely understand. And there are a number of civilians themselves who live by the same discipline and regimentedness that you would find in a military lifestyle.
Right.
But having grown up with a father who was in the military, it's something that I'm a little more used to, I guess, and that is that there's a regimentedness, right? There's this idea of moving with purpose, right? You don't have to rush, but like have some sense of self-worth, dignity, and drive behind what you're doing, but also the idea of I hate to use the word again, but really discipline is what it is, right? To know that at this time we're going to be doing this thing, and then at this time we're going to be doing this thing, and to have to figure out exactly how you're going to wrap up one so that by the correct time you can be moving on to the next task and whatnot. That's why there's a military way to do everything. and this is something that is done day in and day out. This is something that they can do in their sleep, and sometimes actually they do in their sleep. And so because and that really goes to show the reason, though, the fact that those with a tendency to sleepwalk will find themselves, at attention while in the middle of sleeping is goes to show the muscle memory that it builds. And there's a reason for that, because when you have muscle memory, especially now, this is something that those of us who practice martial arts can relate to. When you have muscle memory, you don't have to think as hard about what you're doing in the moment, right? You've alleviated the need to think through, because your muscles are already conditioned and ready to act in the moment.
Which includes the muscle of your mind, by the way, because your mind is reacting to what it sees. And yeah, you develop yourself to a point where you don't have to think through it, which is very like robotic, and I have to do it this way. You've developed so that it's second nature. It's like a second inclination, second nature.
and some of the aspects of discipline in the military are strictly for the sake of discipline. It doesn't have any meaning or purpose that's going to help you on the battlefield, but it's there simply to drive the point of discipline home.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of stuff, and some of it doesn't make sense at first, and then you get into the field of battle and you're like, okay, that makes sense. Like the stupid crab claw thing. We used to have to hold our cups in boot camp like this, by just the bottom rim and only with our first finger and our thumb. And it was to develop these muscles for when you go to one-handed, use the charging handle on an M16, which at first it's like really difficult because you don't have that strength there, but eventually you've developed the muscle that it's super easy. Like I don't even have to think about it.
Kind of a wax on, wax off thing there.
Yeah. And so this military language, this sort of self-discipline, like language, this armor language, is very much on purpose. The idea is to get you to think militaristically about the spiritual warfare. Spiritual warfare. What better to come up with an analogy than warfare, armor? So that's why instead of saying garments, he says armor. Makes more sense. But the military discipline, the lifestyle, it's very regimented, it's very orderly. You're going to see things that are it's a life of self-discipline. At first it's a life of being told exactly what to do, because you need to develop that discipline through somebody else to teach you that discipline. You need to have it beat into your brain, and then eventually you have the self-discipline to do it yourself. You get out of boot camp and you work out on your own, you train on your own, you go shooting on your own, you develop your skills further, but on your own with your own self-discipline. And people who don't have any self-discipline after boot camp don't last very long in the military, because you can tell they're not working on themselves. So self-discipline is a big thing. Training, preparation, like these are all part of the daily regimen, and we'll go into like the more combat mode. But the most notable thing that we want to say here is the daily life of a soldier, Marine, warrior of any kind. Every day he's preparing for a combat that he will A, likely never see, or B, experience 2 minutes of. And that's it. Most people train their entire lives for about 2 minutes of combat, just so they can be alive in that very critical 2 minutes.
One more aspect of something in military, and I'll say it's in military culture. It's not in everybody, but it's something the military definitely tries to instill in everybody. And that is giving an absolute 110% at everything. And so I recently watched the movie The Northman. I was anticipating it being kind of lame. I figured, all right, the show's Vikings and The Last Kingdom, they've been out forever now. Hollywood is late to the game on the Vikings thing. It was actually a really really intense movie, really good movie. But one thing the Skarsgård actor really brought out in it was in some of the combat scenes, you could tell, or at least what he was portraying was giving 110% with every blow that he dealt with his sword. Like, whether or not it landed, if it bounced off the shield, it didn't matter. He was swinging with everything he had every time. And that is, first of all, intimidating.
Yeah. Yes.
That is extremely intimidating. But that's what it takes to win, though. You know?
And you got to develop. I mean, if you swing at 110% every single time, and you don't train for that, you're going to burn yourself out really quick. A lot of combat is oftentimes just outlasting the enemy in endurance. Oftentimes, that's why we run so often, particularly in the Marines, because we do a ton of running in like actual combat. We do a lot of running at the enemy, and it's really a game of who can while the enemy is trying to retreat. The idea is for us to outrun their retreat and close that width on them so that they have no choice but to surrender. Is to completely destroy the enemy by outlasting them in the run. Yeah, so it's a thing you have to work at, right? It doesn't happen overnight. You don't just become a soldier and then you're a professional, right? It's something you really have to build. You have to train, you have to prep, you have to create for yourself a self-discipline. And then once you have achieved a certain level of that self-discipline and training and prep, you get the uniform. And that's the next bullet point. The uniform. So, and I guess I don't want to hijack too much of the conversation. But you know, there's something that I kind of had to go internally. Like I really thought about this. But there are certain things that we do in the uniform that really don't make sense and that are kind of like for the sake of tradition. You know what I mean? Like there's just some of those things where once you put the uniform on, you've accepted the burden of carrying a tradition that precedes you. And like one of those dumb things is like, you know, don't put your hands in your pockets or whatever. And it's like little things like that don't really make sense. They don't really have a disciplinary thing. You know, once you get out to the field, that kind of goes out the window. It's more of a garrison rule. But as Chesty Puller once said, my hands are cold and my pockets are warm. But you know, you get the uniform, and it sort of, that is a symbolic representation of you accepting upon yourself a long line of tradition that precedes you. And it also is a outward expression of the level of discipline you have achieved. This is you saying, I am part of something bigger than myself, and I have to represent that thing adequately in order to not look, you know, terrible. And so, you know, you clean the uniform up, you keep it cared for, you put it on. And when you're wearing the uniform, your attitude is different because people are looking at you now. And so this armor of God thing, right? This is the soldier's uniform, the armor. Nowadays, we have uniforms that we wear that are not armor. But back then, their uniforms were their armor. Like that was much more of a daily thing for them. And so when it comes to the spiritual warfare and developing this discipline, part of that discipline is putting on the uniform and developing your posture, not just your sitting upright, like your actual, the way you present yourself now that you're in uniform.
Yep.
And again, you put on this uniform every day, and the idea is, you know, you could do this for upwards of 20 years and only see 2 minutes of combat where the uniform actually gets put to the test. The only way you're going to survive the 2 minutes is you spend basically your whole life developing the self-discipline and putting on the uniform every single day just to get ready for that 1 2-minute battle of combat that you might see, you know.
And there's two things to that actually. But so one of them being, there's a discipline even to wearing the uniform, right? There is a right way to wear the uniform, and there is only one right way to wear the uniform. And that's for a number of different reasons, but the part of that is posturing, like you said. So I know we were discussing this earlier. There was a study done on inmates who were charged with violent crime, and they were all shown, videos of just the general public, a busy street where people were walking, and they were told to select people on a scale of 1 to 10, that they were either least likely to assault in the street or most likely. And the one consistent thing about those they were least likely to assault had nothing to do with the appearance of physical prowess, so to speak, right? It wasn't big jacked dudes that they were necessarily afraid to attack in the street. It was really just the posture of somebody who is put together, right? Somebody who's neat and disciplined in their appearance. They walk and move with purpose. They are, like I said, they're put together. They know where they're going. They know who they are as a person. Those are the people that they would avoid attacking. Whereas the people that they would be most likely to attack are the people who, they're just halfway thrown together, wandering through life on a whim. They don't know who they are. They're not moving with purpose. That's all posturing. Yes. And then what was the last thing you said?
Preparing for 2 minutes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So to kind of bring things back, right? Because we're coming up on time here, but to bring things back to the extreme example that we give, right? And that is, you might only in one lifetime ever get one extreme example, and like you said, that for most, that probably is the case, right? It's a lifetime of walking in discipline, so that when that extreme moment comes, you are ready. But even the extreme moments may not be as extreme as the fantastical. Today, warfare doesn't look like it used to a long time ago. Back in the age of World War II, you had the Battle of Belleau Wood, you had the Battle of Normandy, you had the Battle of Iwo Jima. You had these massive, big swaths of land and time where combat was being waged at a constant level until there was victory on one side or the other. We don't see that today anymore. How we've waged war in the Middle East so far has been a series of very small, very brief firefights. That's how warfare goes today. So again, your big moment might not be the big moment that a soldier in World War II had. Your big moment might just be the 2.5 minutes of firefight that you see.
And so one thing I want to kind of, this is my favorite, so I saved this for last, is my favorite sort of example, right? So what is the spiritual discipline to put on the quote unquote uniform of spiritual warfare, the armor? What does that look like? And it is very much a physical thing that you do. It is represented by your thoughts, speech, and deeds, right? That affects everything spiritually as well. And I like the military speak because Brad, you may know this. I don't know. I actually haven't asked you before the show, so I'm going to ask you, and anyone in the comments, feel free to answer if you know. Do you know why we stand for the Shemona Esrei, for the Amida?
The standing prayer?
Mm-hmm. 18 benedictions, the 3 daily prayers. Do you know why we stand?
I actually don't. My best guess would be because it's a call to attention.
Bingo. So you'll notice you take 3 steps back to get ready to enter the presence. You take 3 steps forward, you put your feet together, you stand at attention, you bow right before the presence of the king, but then you stand back up at attention, and this is you saying Hineni, which is a call to, which is a military like attention.
Report to order.
Yeah, it's a when someone in the calls attention, the response is Hineni, which is Abraham said Hineni, Isaiah said Hineni shelacheni, here I am, send me. But yeah, you are standing at attention. You are in the morning, first thing in the morning, you wake up, you get dressed, you get ready real quick, you put on your uniform, you put on your talit, which is your uniform. For many Jews and many Messianics, they wear a kippah. That's your helmet. You are getting in your uniform, and you are going to muster in morning formation before the king. You are basically standing at attention. Your bow is your salute, and you begin the prayer process, but you begin in a way that is very much a call to arms. And that is the primary reason why we stand for the Amida. There's another reason. One opinion is that we're made in the image of God and we stand upright, so we should stand upright like the image of God. But the whole feet together and everything, like the angels put their feet together, it's very militaristic style language. It's very much a, every morning in the military, I would wake up stupid early, get dressed and get ready, and then go to formation and stand before the commander and go through the motions of all of our muster, and then we'd go to PT afterwards or whatever, and we'd begin our day.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that development of that kind of discipline that is your spiritual warfare preparedness. This is you prepping every day, training every day of your life with your self-discipline to overcome your evil inclination to sleep in, be lazy, not pray that day, don't go to formation, whatever. It is you are trying to subdue your evil inclination with your good inclination, which is, by the way, that's how the Tanya sort of talks about a tzaddik, a righteous man, as a person who has subdued his Yetzer Hara with his discipline and Yetzer Hatov.
Interesting.
So every commandment, every single thing in the Torah that you're supposed to do throughout your daily life is you putting on the uniform and doing the things that the person in uniform would do, whether it makes sense or not. Honestly, kosher really doesn't make sense. We've talked about this in the past. It's not for your health. It has nothing to do with your health. Cake is kosher. It's not healthy.
Right.
But you're in uniform now. You belong to not armada. You belong to the platoon. We'll say that of the Almighty. And so you will eat what is designated for you. You will live a disciplined life for the sake of the discipline. That is your spiritual warfare. The more you do these things, the more heavenly minded and of a disciplined person you become, so that when that time comes, should it come, for that 2 minutes of panic, you are not in panic. You are instead reacting with your discipline and your training.
One of the beautiful things, actually, I think about just the whole process of the way the morning starts, right? So you almost start off in spiritual warfare, right? Now that we understand what it is, really, it begins as soon as you open your eyes. And this is part of the process of washing hands when you first wake up, right? Your natilat yadayim, right? Is because it's understood, right, that a spirit of sloth envelops the body in sleep. And then when you wake up, the spirit of sloth leaves, except that it rests in the fingertips still. And so this is why they wash their hands first thing in the morning. So first thing in the morning, Jews are performing, spiritual warfare.
That's a more mystical interpretation. The one is that your spirit left your body, and so you're technically dead when you're asleep. And so when your spirit re-enters your body, you are tainted with death, essentially, like in a very minor sort of way. It's why it's only in the hands. That's
1/60th, I think, right? It's like 1/60th of death is
yeah.
What they say.
And so the hand washing is to sort of wash off the stain of death in the morning, which you weren't actually dead, but you were. That's why they call death like sleeping. There's a reason for that. So that there's that correlation there. But yeah, like every little thing in the Torah lifestyle, in the Jewish lifestyle, is spiritual warfare. That is how it's understood. And that has become lost in Christianity to the more spectacular. They sort of focus on the World War II version of spiritual warfare rather than the daily waking up every morning, PTing every day, eating your 3 meals a day, the regiment lifestyle, the making your bed so you can bounce a quarter off it, the pressing your uniform, all of this looks like ceremony, but it's really a discipline for your spiritual battles. And that's how it is viewed. Whereas that sort of idea of the self-discipline is kind of lost on modern Christianity, and it's been sort of covered over with the more, exorcism sort of style thing. In Judaism, not just anyone can do an exorcism. You would look for a tzaddik, somebody who has such perfect self-discipline in the spiritual matters in Torah.
Particularly someone from Galilee, if you could.
Yeah, because the Galileans produced really good exorcists for some reason. Probably because it was a Pharisee stronghold and they were really, really good in their Torah observance. Who would have thought?
Yeah, their daily practice was a regular thing. And then think about that, right? That's why the demons even understood. They knew who Paul was, and Paul never struggled, because when the big moments came up for Paul, there was no effort invested, because he lived a constant life of constant warfare, right?
Yes.
He was a seasoned veteran, if you will.
Yeah. And with that discipline, it gets easier until it becomes second nature. And then you don't struggle spiritually with the things when those things happen. So all that to say, spiritual warfare is a daily thing. It is you warring against your own self-discipline. And luckily for us, instead of a Marines manual like I have on the bookshelf behind me, we have a different kind of military manual. It looks like this. It's called Torah. And, when you put the uniform on, you got to do the things that the uniform represents. Otherwise, you're stealing valor. And, so... Yeah, you like that? I thought of that just now.
Yeah, I like that. That has some serious implications.
Yeah, it's a serious thing to even do a little bit of Torah observance. Any at all. You are putting on the uniform in some way, and so you can't carry the name of God in vain. That's stealing valor.
Yep.
So
but I think we can open up for questions now.
Let's do that. I was just gonna say, if you got questions, now's the time to ask. Throw them up in the chat. Questions, comments, sarcastic remarks, we'll put them all.
Yep. And it's interesting. We mentioned earlier in discussion, but not here tonight, the example in Mark where the disciples were unable to cast out a spirit. I'm not going to say demon, because the text doesn't necessarily say demon. It doesn't even necessarily say unclean spirit. But the idea of illnesses were understood to be a spiritual thing even back then,
right?
By the commonplace people. And so what it appears that the person in question was afflicted with was some form of psychosis of sorts, maybe epilepsy or something. We're given the idea that the person has seizures. And so Yeshua tells his disciples that this kind cannot be removed without prayer and fasting, that it takes prayer and fasting. So this is another aspect of discipline, because prayer and fasting, that's again something the Pharisees did on a regular basis. They fast twice a week, so naturally, yes, somebody like Paul would be constantly ready to engage in that kind of warfare.
If he wasn't ready that day, he'd be ready the next day.
Right. It was a foregone thing. But I think that's interesting too, that particular kind, because the idea of a healing, right? This is your tip. We'll go ahead and answer this.
It's not a question. Keep going.
I was going to say, your typical illness that you think about, be it a fever of some sort or something like that. This is something that's infecting the body. But something like this manner of psychosis is affecting the mind, not just the body at this point. And it's part of the inherent aspect of the mind at this point. So it's interesting that in order to manage that, right, as opposed to managing something that's afflicting the body, where that seemingly takes less effort, but in order to give deliverance over something that is affecting the mind, you actually have to give something of yourself. You have to give something from your body, right? That's where the fasting comes in, because that's what fasting is you literally giving a bit of yourself. You're losing a little bit of yourself to deliver this person from an affliction of the mind. I think there's an interesting contrast there.
And it's like super discipline focused. Because what you're doing, like, fasting is a spiritual action, but it involves not eating. Like, that's a very physical thing. You're essentially saying to your body, because your Yetzer Hara controls hunger, remember. So you're telling your Yetzer Hara, I know you're hungry, but I rule this body, and you eat when I tell you to eat. And today we're not eating.
And so it's interesting. Yeah, it's like you have to master that yourself before you can grant that to somebody else, because that's what it is. You are granting this person the ability to master their own body to first of all, master their own mind. Mm-hmm. Because that's the affliction. The affliction there is that the person is not the master of their own mind.
Yeah, I've talked about this in my Since episodes, which is a Patreon exclusive, by the way. So if you want to support the channel, you get some exclusive content. I'm doing a commentary on Mark, and from the historian's perspective. And one of the points I bring up is oftentimes illnesses are linked to some sort of sin or a lacking spiritually in the old days. And so way back then. And so, if somebody was blind from birth, it was a common belief that he was lacking spiritually in some sort of greedy way. And so the reflection of that is his particular illness. That's a very old way of thinking, but it shows that their answer to these things was a sense of like a battle, like a self-discipline, like a physical thing that you do because it's affecting you on a spiritual level. And that spiritual thing is affecting you physically with some sort of type of illness. And so that's the physical warfare. That's the spiritual warfare that is most common and is actually usually being talked about when we talk about spiritual warfare in the New Testament texts. It's not often. I mean, like, Revelation is probably the only book that's talking about like World War II style spiritual warfare.
This is actually we'll be diving into that a little bit also next week, in how the ancient world didn't really distinguish between a physical illness and a spiritual illness, and so likewise, spiritual healing and physical healing were not distinguished from one another either.
This is a good question. Is this why women do not have the same expectations to pray 3 times daily as men do? Thank you for the question, Granola. Essentially, yeah, the thought in Judaism is that women are already more spiritually sensitive and spiritually attuned.
We'll be going into that next week too.
We will be. And so, they already sort of have an inherent better sense of self-discipline. And so it's not a requirement. It's definitely like encouraged. If they want to pray 3 times a day, they certainly can. But it also, on top of that, they are their mission field, their battlefield is in the house. Whereas the men, typically we go to shul and we learn together in an assembly with a minyan. And so your battlefield is out there, and the women, their battlefield is in the house. They're raising the kids, and they're doing, they're teaching the kids Torah. They're doing a lot of things. And so they are not expected to leave that house, in order to go and pray as the men do. They are much more, they're given a lot more leniency for that kind of thing. But yeah, the primary reason is that they are more spiritually attuned, more sensitive to the spiritual realm. And so they don't need the same kind of discipline. It's like they have the discipline at a certain level that we have to develop that they already have, kind of thing.
Right.
Men must be stubborn. We do tend to be that way.
Well, we are at the hour.
We are.
So I think we can begin to wrap this up. But yeah, I definitely hope that this has helped to kind of shape our idea on first of all, the importance of spiritual warfare, because I think it's actually much more important than even the importance we would naturally think in the extreme examples. Obviously, the idea of an exorcism, demonic possession, angel demon warfare, that's all very important, but it's almost more important when it's brought home to the level of your personal daily discipline. that's a level of importance that I feel should weigh on people a lot more, simply because that, again, this is something that happens every day. You're more likely to run into it every day because, well, that's your life. But other than that, I gotta say I'm super stoked for next week. Again, we'll be announcing the book giveaway, and we will be talking over another subject that kind of just flows with the season of spooky season, and that one I'm super stoked about. I already have several notes on that one. So this one I will be grossly and uncomfortably over prepared for. So
I'm gonna let you take the reins mostly, and this is your expertise anyway. Like when it comes to history, I usually do all the talking. This one you'll be doing most of the talking. So
absolutely,
shameless plug time real quick. Thank you once again to all of our supporters. In fact, let me bring them up real quick while we do this. So thank you to these guys, these special peeps. Man, let me get that banner out of the way. For all of their support. You guys make the dream work. Really, truly, you do. I don't think you guys understand. This thing gets really expensive really quickly. And being able to spread this knowledge and give away books and stuff all the time. Also, you guys really help contribute to the greater community. And we really cannot appreciate you guys enough for all of your generous contributions. So thank you very much to our top tier supporters. Those of you who are a supporter at any level on the Patreon or on the website, be it $1, be it $100, doesn't matter. You will have access to the after parties, which is right here in the Discord server. That's for members only. You get to hang out with us, chill, roast us, do whatever you want. We haven't been roasted yet, but we're still waiting. Actually, I've been roasted
every time.
You have not been roasted. I've been roasted a bunch of times. And
all right, well, guys, it's my turn. Huh? All right.
So
you can't leave me out like this.
So so any supporter at any level, we'll see you in the after parties. And what else do we got? Don't forget, and even if you're not a supporter, join the Discord anyway. We got plenty of stuff going on in the Discord. We're going to be active again. The Discord's been rather quiet this week because of all the holidays. But we're coming back in and everything's good to go. Links are all in the description below if you want to support the channel in any way. And once again, thank you so much for all of your guys' collective generosity. Really, really appreciate you guys.
Absolutely. And I did see one last question asking if there were other ways to support. Yes, there is also a website besides the Patreon, so there you can support that way. Alternatively, there will be a time where we merge one to the other so that we don't have both looming in the air. But that time has not yet come. There are some people who are subscribed to the website, some people who are subscribed to the Patreon, and we are grateful for all of them. So without further ado, if you are subscribed to either the website or the Patreon, you get access to the after parties, and we really hope to see you there after the episode. I think probably some great discussion can be had on what tonight's topic was. Mm-hmm. So without further ado, let's head over that way. And to the rest of you, look, time.